First of all, what are your thoughts on what had happened in Dallas last night?
You know, I'm still, to be completely honest with you, struggling with those emotions. I think like most people, I didn't sleep much last night at all, just watching the events unfold. I don't think anybody saw that coming. I don't think anybody even imagined anything like that, except obviously the people who planned the attack. But it's something that as a chief, you can't help but think about, what if that was my agency? What if those were my officers? How would I be taking care of them? How would I be making sure I'm taking care of their families? What am I doing to make sure that my officers are staying as safe as possible? And what am I doing to make sure that my officers feel as safe as possible? But at the same time, walking that fine line to hopefully get our officers to understand that probably there's no more of an important time to really be engaged with the community right now. You know, I think it's easy to kind of maybe pull back a bit as a police officer and think twice about whether or not you approach somebody and whatever the case may be, and that's totally understandable. But right now, our community needs us more than ever, and they need us to engage, and they need us to be part of that community and be part of that dialogue.
That's nice, and spoken like a true leader. But what about, do you have a sense at all, if your officers can be honest with you, if there is a hesitation to be out there, to be proactive, to be making proactive contacts because something can go wrong, someone is filming, and let's face it,
Mm-hmm.
a sniper took down 5 police officers in Dallas, Texas.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, I think our officers, and not just in Aurora, but I think officers throughout the country have been struggling with that for the last few years. You know, the old saying, the easiest way to not get in trouble is not be there. And I think what was really important for me last night as I was watching the events of Dallas unfold, and I was listening to my radio, and this is hour, 2 hours, 3 hours into the event, our officers were still making traffic stops. Our officers were still responding to domestic violence calls. They were still responding to armed person calls. Things didn't stop for us. And our officers still had a job to do, and they were out there and they were doing an incredible job. And that hit me hard, because I just thought, you know, how easy again that would be to just say, I'm not going to do anything. I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to be the next YouTube sensation. But instead, they're doing what they're charged to do.
In terms of support, what is available for your officers in a situation like this?
I think that's a great question. We have, over the last year or so, have been really working on building up our peer support programs. So, you know, my edict to my officers is they go home safe every night. But that doesn't just mean physically safe, that means emotionally safe. And I also have to make sure that my officers come to work emotionally safe. And obviously with the kind of work that they have to do, the fact that you know, they're running into all sorts of different kinds of dangerous situations. So we have a number of programs in place. We have peer support. We have critical incident stress debrief. We have a new program called a trauma response team, which is a group of officers who respond to a hospital when an officer is seriously injured and works with the family and other officers to make sure that they're okay. So a whole host of things that we're doing. We've actually in the last week brought us a couple guest speakers in about resiliency. They were police officers, and about resiliency, that these two guys went through a lot in their career, having dealt with substance issues and, you know, personal crisis, and how they got through that to continue to be productive and professional police officers. So we pay a lot of attention to not only the physical safety side of it, but also the wellness, emotional side.
I don't know if you can speak for the people who were involved in the shooting, in the Aurora Theater shooting.
Mm-hmm.
But if you had spoken with them today, I'm curious how they're feeling based on my experience with the victims. Every new shooting, every new mass shooting, no matter who is involved and who's responsible, brings up emotions and feelings.
It's a trigger, right?
Yes.
It's a trigger. And, we saw that not long after the Orlando shooting, just a few weeks ago. And so we do our best to make sure that we are reaching out to those officers that we know were part of the theater response, and checking on them. And they also know that there's a lot of resources available to them, not only inside the department, but outside the department that they can use. So I think that's one of those situations, unfortunately, that's going to be with us for a while, and we will continue to help them, get through that. And those officers, again, they're still going to those crazy calls. They're still doing their job. And so I'm real very proud of what they're doing.
It's probably early to talk about the lessons from Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't buried their dead yet. But on the surface, looking at the protest and the gear that they were wearing or not wearing and what they did or didn't do, is it something that you as a department will look at their whether it's how they staffed a protest or how they responded to an active shooter, or is it something that the department will study and say, okay, this is how we should or shouldn't do? Is it going to be an example of, we're not going to judge them, but is it going to be an example of moving forward, how to strategize and gear up for different things?
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about, the theater shooting in Aurora, and we are still getting requests from around the country to speak at departments, for them to learn the lessons that we learned. The same will apply here. And, I know that there may be questions about, were the officers wearing appropriate equipment at the protest? I worked in Seattle for 31 years, and that's it's a protest city. And you have to kind of measure how you're going to dress, because you know that if you go in there with full helmet and riot gear and everything else, that might spark something that you don't want to spark from the crowd. And so you have to kind of play that balance game of, okay, I'm going to have a number of officers who are going to be just dressed like I'm dressed right now. You might have a group of officers who are waiting in the wings who have more of the heavy equipment. And you also have to gauge what the mood of the crowd is. You have to gauge what kind of information you're getting about the protest ahead of time. So all those things play a factor in determining how you're going to prepare for a protest, how you're going to staff it, deploy. And I think in most situations, you what if situations as much as possible. What if we start taking rocks and bottles? What if the crowd decides to take a freeway? What if there's an active shooter inside the crowd? But I don't think anybody expected something like this, where it was a full-on attack from an elevated position. I'm not aware of anything like this happening in our country before. And so, I don't know if it will be necessarily a game changer, but I think it will be something that event planners, particularly police event planners, are going to take into consideration to make sure that their officers and the community is as safe as possible during these kinds of events.
Really, what could you do? Going and not going, or going in helmet and full riot gear and a Bearcat, what could have stopped that? They were ambushed.
Right. And what I thought was very interesting in hearing from many of the protesters who were involved before the shooting began was that so many of them said that the officers that were there were professional, they were friendly, they were doing everything possible to make sure that the protest moved along safely. Dallas did their job when it comes to protecting the community's constitutional rights to free speech. And so I've heard very few negative comments about how the officers were during the protest itself before the shooting began.
In terms of trying to glean lessons or make this a teachable moment or educate our viewing public, what do you think that the people who are watching you here locally, what do you think they should know about either what happened there or your response here and what we do here, if it's the same or different?
I think the most important thing right now, to be completely honest, and I apologize in advance if I'm not really answering your question, but this is like any other terror, I'm classifying these attackers as terrorists. Terrorism is about not only the act itself, but it's the effect of that act. What's the long-term effects are going to be? I mean, you think about 9/11 and what happened to air travel since then. I mean, it's that ongoing type of thing. We can't allow what these terrorists did to create polarization within our communities, particularly between the police and communities of color, but even within the communities themselves, because I think the community in many ways can be divided on this. And I think it's really important that people just take a deep breath for a moment and really think about, okay, what is it we want as a city or as a community, as a society, and how do we start building upon those relationships between the police and the community? I think in any relationship, it always comes down to communication, right? If you don't have good communication, relationships fail, no matter whether it's a personal relationship, work relationship, but especially right now. And, one of the things I'm very heartened about is that before the Dallas situation occurred last night, just like an hour, 2 hours before it occurred, knowing people were energized about what happened in Baton Rouge and in the suburb outside of Minneapolis, we were getting lots of outreach from people in our community. One, saying that they support us. Two, if they have concerns or questions, wanting to get together and have dialogue and not to create a situation where we have this, potential violent, divisive outcome. And so we got a lot of that. And then after, during the whole Dallas situation, my phone was ringing off the hook with either phone calls or texts from leaders within our community saying, we need to sit down, we need to talk, we need to bring the community together, let's figure out a way to do that. There's a lot of cities that don't have that, and we're very fortunate in Aurora, and I think pretty much in the general metropolitan area to have that kind of, our law enforcement to have that kind of relationship with the community.
In terms of your personal protection as a police officer, within the confines of which you're willing to discuss, are Aurora police officers who are on the street required to wear protective equipment?
Absolutely. We have a number of policies in place about the kind of equipment they can carry, the kind of equipment they need to have immediately on their person, the kind of equipment they have to have immediately within reach, like in their trunk or something like that. And they're required to make sure they have that at all times when they're on the street. And we don't typically have problems with officers not following that rule. I think officers recognize the dangers of this job and taking whatever precautions they can to make them safer, not only just for themselves, but also understanding that if an officer gets seriously hurt, they can't protect the community at that moment. So we want to do everything we can to protect our officers and protect the community.
As a career police officer, how do you feel about a situation where an unarmed man just assassinated your fellow officer? I mean, no one is immune from something.
Mm-hmm. For me right now, it is deja vu. When I was in Seattle in 2009, one of my officers was ambushed and killed. A week and a half later, in the very close suburb of Lakewood, 4 officers were killed while sitting in a coffee shop. A week or two after that, an officer was killed at a domestic violence. So basically, I think we lost 6 to 7 officers within about an 8-week period. All those situations were because the officers were wearing a uniform. They were ambushed. And I was directly involved in all of those situations in one way or another, and so it's like deja vu for me. And in fact, I found myself last night actually reaching out to the former chief of Lakewood, who's since retired, but just wanted to make sure he's okay, because Lakewood is a small department in Washington, and to have lost 4 at one time. I just remember how devastating that was for him, and I know that probably brought back a lot of things for him. So it's it is an incredibly surreal moment right now. I still haven't grasped it, and I don't know when I will. And I think right now this is probably, at least in my memory, the worst attack on police in our country's history. You know, not just from the I don't remember in my lifetime 5 officers having been killed in one incident, and then let alone 6 or 7 others who have been seriously injured. And I pray that we don't have a 6th or a 7th die. And I know, just from my own experience and having dealt with a number of agencies within Seattle and within the metro area, that it's going to take a long time for Dallas to heal. It will take a long time for them to heal. This is not something that they're going to get over quickly, and Dallas will have a lot of work ahead of them. Not just these next couple weeks as they go through the ceremonial process, but it will be hell on them over these next few years, and it will be hell on the families. You know, it's 5 officers died, but so did 5 families, and it's going to play a toll on them.
So is what happened in Dallas last night? Is that your trigger?
That's my trigger. Yeah, it is. It's not, the event itself, the way it went down, is not something I've ever seen or experienced. But, I remember, just walking in to the Lakewood Police Department an hour and a half after it happened, and seeing the look on the face of the chief. And he's like, he was just in shock. He had absolutely no idea what to do. And yeah, it all comes back.
Were you a chief then in Seattle already? Or?
I was a deputy chief.
Deputy chief.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a personal question. I'm going to you can answer it.
That's okay.
For me, when my trigger is a shooting because of the Aurora,
Mm-hmm.
and so I get emotional. It's hard for me to talk about
Mm-hmm.
things. How does your trigger manifest? How are your feelings manifesting?
Well, for me, it's getting as involved as possible. I think everybody has their own way in handling grief and stress and things like that when something like that happens. And for me, going back to Seattle, it was being there for the family and being there for the officers that were left behind. And it was being there for, and again, not just those first 2 weeks where everybody is reaching out to them and everybody's there for them, because once the funerals are done, and the flag has been given to the family, most people go home and go back to their lives. And you have 5 families, you have officers who were survivors who are now left to trying to pick up the pieces, and just knowing that we're doing everything to keep them healthy. And the same thing holds true for Aurora. I came here a year and a half ago. I was not here during the shooting. We had our own spate of active shooter situations in Seattle, but nothing to the level of Aurora. But even when I got here, I could still see the pain on the families' faces. I could still see the pain on the officers' faces. So we've committed, since then, that we're going to, this is not something we're just going to put behind us and lock in a box and pretend it never happened.
So you're a doer. You spring into action.
That's what cops do.
Right.
I think I speak for most cops.
Right? But you have to stop.
You do have
What
to stop.
You feel.
You do.
And when
You do.
feel, how do you feel?
You go through those periods where, you question, why am I doing this? You go through those periods where you feel that pain. But for me, and I can only speak for me, that's what I guess in a lot of ways gives me that energy to get back up and do what I need to do. So.
Thank you for being candid with me.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that you want to add or that I haven't asked you?
I think, the only thing I guess I want to say is, I think, I said earlier that this is a situation that we need to be really careful that doesn't polarize our community. And, just like when we see videos across the country of, shootings that involve officers and the the energy and the outcry over that, it's easy for some folks, not all, but some folks to lump all police officers together. And we're not. You know, we are individuals. We have our own dreams. We have our own fears. We have our own lives. But it's also going to be a challenge right now, not only to folks in the community, but also even for some of our officers, is to not allow this situation to cause them to lump everybody together. And you know, I saw comments on Facebook that, you know, this was a Black Lives Matter sanctioned incident. Absolutely not. I can't speak for Black Lives Matter in other parts of the country, but at least the one here in Aurora, Denver, we meet with them on a quarterly basis. We keep, you know, just have sit down, coffee, dialogue. And in fact, heard from them yesterday, you know, letting me know they were thinking about us. So, you know, I want to make sure as much as possible that we're not lumping them into this. These are individual terrorists who made an individual decision, and not only did they shoot police officers, but they put thousands of people in danger. And that's not. I think right now, this is, like I said earlier, there is not a greater time that we really need to come together as a society and a community and really start having those difficult conversations. And when it revolves around race, when it revolves around gender, sexual orientation, whatever the case may be, those are hard discussions, but we have to have them if we're going to move forward in a healthy way.
Thank you, Chief, very much.
Thank you.